Imagine waking up tomorrow to find that the oceans have risen by 200 feet overnight. The shock would be unimaginable. Coastal cities, which are home to millions of people, would be submerged in a matter of hours. Think about New York City, Miami, or even places like London and Tokyo. Each one would be drastically altered, with many of these iconic skylines vanishing beneath the waves. Roads, buildings, and infrastructure would all be lost, leaving nothing but a flood of water and debris. Entire populations would be displaced, forced to abandon their homes and seek refuge on higher ground. For those living in low-lying coastal areas, it would be a complete nightmare. The immediate effects would be devastating. Not only would human habitats be destroyed, but the ecosystems along the coast would be wiped out. Wetlands, forests, and animal habitats that rely on the balance of the land and sea would be completely destroyed. Species of animals that rely on these environments, like coastal birds, fish, and even some land mammals, would struggle to survive or face extinction. This would set off a chain reaction, with disruptions to food sources and the delicate balance of life on Earth. Freshwater sources, which are already threatened by rising sea levels, would be completely contaminated. Salt water would flood aquifers and rivers, making it nearly impossible to drink or use the water for irrigation. Water shortages would become widespread, and regions that depend on freshwater resources would face enormous challenges in providing for their populations. The agricultural industry would also suffer. Crops along coastlines would be destroyed, and the land that once supported farming would be rendered infertile because of the salinity introduced by the rising seas. In places that once thrived off agriculture, food scarcity would become a massive issue, leading to a global food crisis. Economically, the toll would be astronomical. Many of the world's largest cities are located along coastlines, and these areas are central to global trade. Shipping ports, which are responsible for moving goods across the globe, would be lost. The economic fallout would be immense, with industries depending on coastal infrastructure brought to a halt. The disruption in trade would send shockwaves through the global economy, affecting everything from small businesses to international markets. Nations with large coastal populations would face not only the loss of their infrastructure, but also a loss in economic stability, with millions of people left without jobs or homes. The environmental damage would extend far beyond the immediate destruction. The entire planet would feel the effects. Species that have lived along coasts for centuries would be displaced, and the natural habitats that supported them would be gone. This wouldn't just be a problem for wildlife. Humans would also be facing extreme climate conditions. With the loss of the coastal ecosystems, the Earth would lose critical carbon sinks that help keep our planet's temperature regulated. The loss of wetlands, mangroves, and other coastal features would mean a decrease in the Earth's ability to absorb carbon dioxide, further accelerating the effects of climate change. It's a vicious cycle that could intensify the global warming crisis even further. As the oceans creep higher, there would be even more pressing questions. Where would displaced people go? How would nations with limited land take in millions of refugees? The political and social strain would be unimaginable. Countries would struggle to handle the migration of people forced from their homes, and this could lead to conflict. With so much of the world's population concentrated near coastlines, countries would be facing a new wave of refugees, and many governments would be unprepared for the scale of the crisis. The world as we know it would be changed overnight. This isn't a scenario that could be brushed off as something far in the future. Climate change is causing sea levels to rise, and while a rise of 200 feet in a single night is extreme, we can already see the signs that our world's coastlines are becoming more vulnerable. The next few decades could bring an increase in extreme weather events, more floods, and rising sea levels, perhaps not to the extreme we're imagining here, but certainly enough to cause serious disruption and distress for millions of people. This scenario forces us to confront the reality of what could happen if we don't address the ongoing threats posed by climate change. The problem may seem distant, but the threat is real, and it's time we start taking it seriously. Would humanity be able to cope with such a rapid rise in ocean levels? Could we adapt quickly enough to prevent total devastation, or would we be too late to avoid the worst of it? These are the questions we must face now before the waters rise any further. If the oceans were to rise 200 feet overnight, the immediate effects would go far beyond just the physical destruction of cities and infrastructure. The sheer scale of the damage would be something humanity has never seen before. In addition to the loss of human life, the damage to the environment would be irreversible, and the consequences would ripple across the globe in ways we can't fully comprehend. As we imagine what this world would look like, it's important to think about how the sudden submerging of land would affect the entire planet's ecosystem. The rise in sea levels would drown forests, wetlands, and other ecosystems that thrive at the edge of land and water. Imagine the coastal forests, which are home to countless species of animals, birds, and insects. They would be wiped out almost instantly. The tidal surge would destroy delicate ecosystems like mangroves, which act as vital buffers, protecting coastlines from erosion and providing habitats for fish and other wildlife. Without these natural defenses, coastal areas would become more vulnerable to storms and erosion, worsening the impact of climate change over time. The changes would not be confined to the immediate area of the flood. The shifting of the ocean levels would also alter ocean currents, which play a crucial role in regulating the Earth's climate. The Gulf Stream, which is responsible for transporting warm water from the tropics to the North Atlantic, could be disrupted, potentially triggering a chain reaction that could change weather patterns around the world. The sudden surge in sea levels would also flood freshwater rivers, lakes, and aquifers, mixing salt water with what is normally fresh water. As these waters encroach on human settlements, they would contaminate supplies of clean water, turning them into salty, undrinkable sources. In many places, freshwater supplies are already under stress, and this additional strain would push the planet's most vulnerable communities to the brink of disaster. Agriculture, which relies heavily on stable climate conditions and predictable weather patterns, would be severely impacted. Coastal farmlands, some of the most productive in the world, would be swallowed up by the ocean along with fertile soil that nourishes crops. The loss of crops would lead to a global food crisis, as agriculture across affected regions would be severely crippled. Coastal cities that rely on fishing as a primary source of food would lose their access to marine life, as the habitats that sustain fish would also be flooded and destroyed. Even those who rely on the land for crops would suffer as farmlands are contaminated by salt water, rendering them useless. This would create a situation where food security becomes a global issue, affecting not just the regions closest to the rising seas, but also nations far inland. Additionally, the rise in ocean levels would expose the global economy to unprecedented shocks. Countries with heavily developed coastal cities would see their economic power drained, as cities like New York, Tokyo, and London are home to some of the world's largest financial institutions. These cities are crucial hubs for international trade and finance, and their destruction would send shockwaves through the global market. International trade would come to a halt as ports are submerged, preventing goods from being shipped to various parts of the world. Industries that rely on coastal infrastructure for shipping and manufacturing would collapse. The loss of these economic centers would cause massive job losses, and the ripple effects would be felt for years as nations scramble to rebuild and adapt to the new realities of a world that has been dramatically reshaped. On top of the environmental and economic challenges, there would be a massive social impact. As millions of people are displaced, the crisis would create refugee situations on an unprecedented scale. Countries that already face pressure from migration would now have to deal with a surge of climate refugees seeking shelter in more inland areas. This could strain existing infrastructures and resources, particularly in regions that are not well equipped to handle large numbers of displaced people. Governments around the world would need to coordinate a global response to provide housing, food, and medical assistance to those who have lost everything. But this would also put stress on governments and organizations that are already stretched thin, potentially leading to political instability and social unrest. While the ocean rising by 200 feet in one night is a terrifying hypothetical, it brings into focus the real threats that rising sea levels pose over the long term. While we may not see such a drastic change overnight, the effects of climate change are already visible, and the need to act has never been greater. In many parts of the world, the effects of rising sea levels are already being felt through increased flooding, coastal erosion, and extreme weather events. If we continue on the current path without taking meaningful action to address climate change, the world we live in could become unrecognizable. This hypothetical scenario pushes us to consider what's at stake if we don't take drastic steps to reduce our impact on the planet. The fate of future generations could very well depend on the choices we make today. As the oceans rise 200 feet, the survival of countless species, including humans, would be at risk. It's not just the coastal areas that would face destruction, but the planet as a whole would experience significant changes that would be felt in every corner of the world. The loss of biodiversity would be one of the most tragic outcomes. Entire ecosystems that are reliant on specific climates and landscapes would be wiped out. And it's not just the land that would be impacted. Marine life would also suffer, and entire food webs would collapse. Species that rely on shallow coastal waters for breeding, such as sea turtles, dolphins, and coral reefs, would be devastated by the rising tides. What's even more concerning is that the impact wouldn't stop at the oceans. The way our planet absorbs and distributes heat would change. The loss of landmass would alter the albedo effect, which refers to the reflection of sunlight off the Earth's surface. With so much of the land covered by water, the Earth would absorb more heat, speeding up global warming and possibly triggering more extreme weather events. This would include more intense storms, floods, and droughts, making the planet harder to live on for both humans and animals. The changing temperatures would also have a direct effect on agriculture. As certain regions become submerged, others could experience unpredictable weather patterns, with some areas becoming too hot to grow crops and others suffering from extreme drought. Countries that rely on farming to feed their populations would be hit hardest. Cities and regions that are already vulnerable to heat waves would see temperatures soar to dangerous levels, making living conditions unbearable. Areas that were once ideal for farming may turn into deserts, while places that are already arid could become uninhabitable due to the added stress from extreme heat and water scarcity. The process of displacement would also be far more complex. With entire regions becoming submerged, there would be no place for millions of displaced people to go. Refugees would flee not just to neighboring countries, but to places far inland, where they would face overcrowding, lack of resources, and increasing poverty. The strain on inland cities would create significant challenges. Housing, food, and jobs would become scarce, and local governments might struggle to provide for the large influx of people. Communities that were once stable could be thrown into turmoil, and the social fabric of entire regions would begin to unravel as resources become even more limited. This forced migration would also have a lasting impact on global relations. Countries that are already dealing with political instability or strained resources could face new pressures, potentially leading to conflict over territory, water, and food. With governments stretched thin, the ability to maintain order could be severely compromised, leading to greater instances of civil unrest. Military forces may be called upon to maintain order, but in the face of such widespread disaster, even the most powerful nations might struggle to keep things under control. This could lead to tensions, not just between nations, but within them. One of the most alarming consequences of rising sea levels would be the loss of cultural heritage. Entire cities that have stood for centuries, places with rich histories, art, and architecture would be lost to the ocean. Ancient civilizations like those in Egypt, Greece, and Italy, whose coastal cities have weathered the test of time, would see their most precious landmarks washed away. Historical sites like the pyramids of Giza, the ruins of Pompeii, and the Great Wall of China could be submerged, taking with them the legacies of past civilizations. This loss of history would be tragic, as many cultures would lose the physical remnants of their heritage. At the same time, the physical landscape would be dramatically altered. Mountain ranges that were once isolated from the oceans would now become surrounded by water. New coastlines would emerge, but they would be barren, lacking the ecosystems that once flourished. Islands and coastal cities that were once vibrant and full of life would become ghost towns, leaving behind nothing but remnants of human civilization. And as the flood waters would likely shift, this new geography could disrupt the Earth's weather systems even further, causing unpredictable weather patterns and new challenges for all life on Earth. While such a massive change in sea levels may feel like a distant and far-off possibility, the reality is that rising seas are already happening, though not at such an extreme pace. We are beginning to see the signs in coastal cities around the world where flooding has become more frequent and severe. The changes in our environment, whether gradual or sudden, are a reminder that the planet is a delicate system, and pushing it beyond its natural limits can have disastrous consequences. The best we can do is to mitigate the damage as much as possible, but a scenario where oceans rise by 200 feet would be far beyond our capacity to reverse. The only way to prevent such a future is by taking immediate, substantial action to combat climate change today. The more we wait, the more likely we are to face an uncertain future that we are not prepared for. As we near the final stretch of this exploration into the catastrophic effects of a 200-foot rise in ocean levels, it's important to reflect on the larger picture and consider the lasting legacy this kind of change would leave behind. Beyond the immediate devastation, the world would face an ongoing struggle for survival, with every aspect of human life dramatically altered. If the oceans were to rise 200 feet, the loss of land would essentially reshape the entire geopolitical structure. Countries would lose major cities and entire regions, and the impact on global populations would be astronomical. Economies that once relied on agriculture, tourism, and coastal industries would be wiped out. Countries like the Netherlands, which are known for their battle against rising sea levels, would see their centuries of expertise rendered useless in the face of such an extreme threat. There would be nowhere to run. Everyone, no matter where they are, would be forced to adapt or perish. The environmental consequences would be irreversible. For those who are lucky enough to survive, the world that they would inherit would be a barren, hostile environment. With much of the planet now underwater, the loss of biodiversity would be severe. Without coastal ecosystems to protect marine life, coral reefs would disappear and the loss of vital species would cause a collapse in the food chain. With the world's coastal habitats submerged, it would be nearly impossible to reverse the effects on the planet's ecosystems. Even if drastic measures were taken to combat climate change and environmental degradation in the aftermath, the damage to natural habitats and wildlife would likely be beyond repair. On a social level, the rise in sea levels would leave deep scars. The worldwide dislocation of people would cause massive psychological strain, as entire communities would be scattered, leaving families divided, homes destroyed, and lives upended. Cultural traditions, stories, and the very identity of entire regions would be lost as they disappeared beneath the rising waters. For the survivors, a new sense of community would be essential, as humanity would need to band together in smaller, more isolated pockets to rebuild what was lost. This rebuilding process would take generations, as the infrastructure that sustained civilizations before would be gone, leaving only the ruins of the past to serve as a grim reminder of what we lost. A critical issue that would emerge in this new world would be the scarcity of resources. Fresh water would become even more valuable, and access to clean drinking water would be a matter of life and death. As agricultural lands are lost and food sources become increasingly scarce, the ability to grow enough food to feed the surviving populations would be a monumental challenge. The world would see widespread hunger, malnutrition, and poverty, all of which would lead to intense social unrest. Access to food, water, and shelter would become the primary concern for every survivor, and communities would fight not just for land but for basic survival. In the midst of this devastation, the global community would be forced to reconsider how we approach the environment and climate change. It's easy to ignore the warnings or hope that the worst will never happen, but when the worst does strike, it will be too late to reverse the damage. The idea of waiting for technological advancements or policy changes to solve such a monumental issue is a dangerous illusion. The world would have to act together as one, to learn from past mistakes and come together to prevent the unimaginable from becoming reality. Perhaps one of the most powerful lessons in this hypothetical scenario is that every single action we take today has far-reaching consequences, from the smallest personal choices we make regarding energy use to the largest global decisions about climate change policy. Each action adds up. The rise in sea levels, while unimaginable in its extremity, is not entirely beyond our control. The future may seem uncertain, but the path we choose to take today will determine whether future generations face an apocalyptic reality or a world with a fighting chance for survival. As we conclude, it's clear that while a 200-foot rise in ocean levels is a terrifying hypothetical, it's a reminder of the fragility of our planet and the urgent need for action. The time to act is now, before the oceans rise too high to stop. The question remains, will we rise to the challenge, or will we wait until it's too late? Lituya Bay, located in the southeastern part of Alaska, may appear to be a quiet, peaceful fjord, but it has a history of terrifying and destructive power that most people don't even know about. On July 9, 1958, Lituya Bay became the site of one of the most shocking natural events ever recorded, a megatsunami that reached a mind-blowing height of 1,720 feet. To put that into perspective, that's taller than the Empire State Building, and no tsunami before or since has ever come close to matching that record. The event began with a massive landslide when an enormous chunk of rock, estimated to be around 30 million cubic yards in size, suddenly plunged into the bay. This was no ordinary landslide. The force of the rocks crashing into the water sent a powerful wave surging up and over the surrounding cliffs, creating a tsunami of catastrophic proportions. The wave tore through the narrow bay at an incredible speed, wiping out everything in its path. It was so powerful that it even stripped trees from the mountainsides, leaving behind a barren landscape where the lush forest had once stood. Despite how incredible and destructive the megatsunami was, there were only a few eyewitnesses. The most well-known of these witnesses were the people aboard the fishing boat, the Lynn, a vessel that was near the bay when the event occurred. The crew of the Lynn had a front row seat to the incredible wave as it hurtled toward the shore. They managed to survive, but the impact of the megatsunami left them in awe of nature's raw power. What happened at Lituya Bay in 1958 raises a lot of questions, some of which still don't have clear answers. How exactly did the landslide happen? Was it purely a natural event, or did human activity, such as logging or other environmental factors, contribute to the disaster? And could something like this happen again? The sheer magnitude of the megatsunami's height and its unexpected nature have led to many speculations and studies over the years, but there's still no concrete understanding of all the factors involved. As scientists continue to study Lituya Bay and its unusual geography, the mystery deepens. The bay is surrounded by steep cliffs that create a narrow, confined space. This trapped environment amplifies the force of natural events, making Lituya Bay a particularly dangerous and unstable place. The landscape, combined with the ongoing tectonic activity in the region, sets the stage for even more potential disasters in the future. Scientists have learned that the same geological forces that caused the megatsunami of 1958 are still at play today, meaning that Lituya Bay's danger has never fully passed. As we move forward, we'll dive deeper into the science behind what happened in 1958 and explore the ongoing risks that this place faces. Stay tuned as we continue this journey through one of the most fascinating and dangerous natural events in history. In order to understand the full scale of the 1958 megatsunami in Lituya Bay, we need to explore the geological forces that made it possible. The event didn't happen randomly. The bay is situated in a region with a unique and volatile combination of factors that make it prone to natural disasters, especially ones as destructive as a megatsunami. Lituya Bay is a narrow fjord, which means it's a body of water surrounded by steep, towering cliffs. The geography here is a major part of what turned a landslide into a record-breaking tsunami. When the rock slide occurred on that fateful day in July, the steep cliffs funneled the massive amount of energy from the falling debris into a concentrated area. This caused the water to rise with such force that the wave reached an unimaginable height. With nowhere for the energy to escape, the force of the water surged upward rather than spreading out over a larger area. It created a tsunami that was much more powerful than what you'd typically see in the open ocean, but what made this particular landslide so massive? For starters, the region around Lituya Bay is incredibly seismically active. The Pacific and North American tectonic plates are constantly shifting, and the pressure between them builds up over time. This ongoing movement of the Earth's crust can trigger massive earthquakes, which in turn can cause landslides. In fact, it's believed that the landslide that triggered the megatsunami was caused by a relatively small earthquake, measuring about 7.8 on the Richter scale. While not a huge earthquake by some standards, it was enough to send tons of rock crashing into the bay. The landslide itself wasn't just a random event, it was part of the complex natural forces that had been at play in the region for thousands of years. The bay's geological history is filled with tectonic activity, and its physical structure makes it prone to events like this. With steep cliffs and a narrow channel, the water in Lituya Bay is essentially trapped in a confined space. When something like a landslide occurs, the water doesn't have much room to spread out, and it ends up pushing straight up and over the cliffs, creating a catastrophic wave. Adding to the danger of the bay is the region's high level of seismic activity. Earthquakes are a regular occurrence, and while most are small, larger ones can trigger events like the landslide that led to the megatsunami. The energy released from these earthquakes can shake loose unstable rock formations, triggering massive rock slides into the bay. This, combined with the topography of the bay itself, creates a perfect storm for disaster. Understanding the geological makeup of Lituya Bay helps explain why this megatsunami was so devastating, but it also raises important questions about future events. The forces at work here haven't gone away. In fact, they're still very much present. The same tectonic activity that triggered the 1958 disaster could cause similar events to occur again. With ongoing seismic activity in the region, Lituya Bay remains a place of concern for scientists studying the area. As we move on, we'll look at the aftermath of the Megatsunami and how scientists have studied its effects. Despite its terrifying nature, this event has provided valuable insights into the power of natural disasters and the ways we can better understand and prepare for them in the future. The aftermath of the 1958 Lituya Bay Megatsunami was both stunning and sobering. The destructive wave, which reached an unimaginable height of 1,720 feet, left an indelible mark on the landscape and offered valuable insights into the forces that shape our planet. In the hours and days following the disaster, scientists and survivors began to grasp the full scope of the devastation. The most immediate and visible effect of the Megatsunami was the widespread destruction of the surrounding forest. As the wave surged up the cliffs and crashed into the mountains, it stripped trees from the slopes, leaving behind a barren and eerie landscape. The water's sheer force was so great that it uprooted massive trees and left them scattered across the bay, some of them still floating in the water long after the event. The power of the wave was undeniable and its impact on the environment was clear. Not only were trees destroyed, but the wave also caused significant erosion along the cliffs, leaving scars on the land that are still visible today. Remarkably, the Megatsunami's effects were not limited to just the surrounding environment. The local population, who lived in small villages near the bay, were lucky to escape the full force of the disaster. While there were no fatalities directly linked to the Megatsunami itself, the event did cause major disruptions to local communities. The destruction of land and wildlife affected the livelihoods of those who depended on the region's natural resources for survival. Despite the isolated nature of the bay, the force of the event was felt across the surrounding area, and the cleanup and recovery process was long and difficult. One of the most fascinating aspects of the 1958 Megatsunami is the fact that only a few people witnessed the event firsthand. A small number of boats were in the bay at the time, and while most were able to escape the brunt of the wave, one fisherman and his family were in a boat near the shoreline when the wave struck. Their accounts provide an eerie glimpse into the terrifying power of the disaster. As the wave hit, the water in the bay suddenly surged, and they reported seeing the mountain cliffs on either side of them disappear into a wall of water. The fisherman and his family were lucky to survive, but their experience is a vivid reminder of the destructive potential of such an event. The scientific community was quick to respond to the Megatsunami, conducting studies to understand its full scope and the forces that made it possible. Researchers used a combination of eyewitness accounts, geological surveys, and data from nearby seismic stations to piece together the puzzle of what had happened. What they discovered was a rare and unusual event that, while not common, could potentially happen again. The Megatsunami in Lituya Bay was not just a freak accident, but rather a reminder of the raw power that exists in Earth's geological processes. As researchers began to analyze the event, they realized that the Lituya Bay Megatsunami was unique, not only because of its extreme height, but also because of the specific conditions that made it possible. It was the perfect storm of seismic activity, topography, and geology that resulted in the massive wave. In a way, the disaster offered a rare opportunity for scientists to study how large-scale landslides and earthquakes can create such intense tsunamis, something they may not have been able to study under normal circumstances. Looking forward, scientists began to consider what the future might hold for Lituya Bay. While the region's seismic activity had been relatively stable in the years since the 1958 Megatsunami, the underlying geological factors that caused the disaster are still very much in play. The Pacific and North American tectonic plates continue to shift, and the possibility of another landslide or earthquake remains a real threat. But what makes Lituya Bay particularly dangerous is its location and its ability to amplify the effects of such events. The bay's narrow, enclosed shape funnels the energy of any seismic or landslide event directly into the water, making it a potential breeding ground for another megatsunami. As we move forward in this story, it's important to consider how the Lituya Bay Megatsunami has shaped our understanding of natural disasters and the science behind them. The lessons learned from this event continue to inform the ways we study and prepare for similar events in the future, highlighting the need for more research into the dynamics of earthquakes, landslides, and tsunamis. The events of July 9th, 1958 may be long behind us, but the lessons they left us with are still very much relevant today. As we reach the conclusion of the Lituya Bay Megatsunami story, it's important to reflect on the lasting impact the event has had on both scientific research in the local area. The 1958 megatsunami was a game changer for the way we understand the power of nature and the destructive potential of tsunamis. Despite the rare and isolated circumstances of this event, it has sparked ongoing investigations into similar areas around the world, all of which have the potential to experience a similar catastrophe. One of the most significant consequences of the megatsunami was the heightened awareness it brought to the vulnerability of coastal areas that are situated near active geological zones. As a result, scientists began to study how earthquakes and landslides could trigger tsunamis in other regions with similar topographical and seismic conditions. While Lituya Bay is an extreme case, the principles of how it all unfolded have been applied to better understand tsunamis in general, especially those that might occur along the Pacific Ring of Fire, where tectonic activity is high. Although there were no fatalities directly linked to the megatsunami, the disaster highlighted the importance of early warning systems and preparedness in regions at risk for tsunamis. The speed at which the waves surged through Lituya Bay left little time for people to respond, making it clear that places with a history of seismic activity need to be on high alert. In the years following the event, efforts to improve tsunami warning systems became a priority for many coastal regions around the world. Scientists also started to look more closely at the effects of large landslides and how they could trigger waves, a crucial element in preventing or mitigating future disasters. The unique and isolated geography of Lituya Bay has also made it a focal point for geological studies. Researchers continue to study the bay and its surroundings to this day, gathering data on its ongoing seismic activity and the state of its landscape. The potential for another major landslide or earthquake is still very much a possibility, and while it may be impossible to predict exactly when or where the next catastrophic event will strike, the lessons learned from the 1958 megatsunami have paved the way for better preparedness and understanding of similar events elsewhere. What is perhaps most striking about the Lituya Bay Megatsunami is the sheer power of nature. It serves as a reminder that even in the most peaceful and remote locations, the Earth's forces are always at work, shaping and reshaping the landscape in ways we can't always predict. This disaster may have been an extreme and rare event, but it's one that serves as a warning that nothing on Earth is immune from the power of natural forces. In the years since the disaster, the memory of the megatsunami has lingered, both in the scientific community and in the local memory. It stands as a testament to nature's ability to surprise us and remind us of how little control we truly have over the forces that shape our world. Lituya Bay may seem quiet and peaceful today, but it still holds the potential for the kind of sudden, devastating event that forever alters the landscape. As we finish reflecting on the events of July 9th, 1958, it's clear that Lituya Bay continues to be a unique geological and environmental location that holds important lessons for all of us. It's a reminder that while we may not be able to control or fully predict these catastrophic events, understanding and respecting the natural world around us is essential for surviving and navigating the unpredictability of life on Earth. And who knows, perhaps one day scientists will uncover even more secrets hidden in the depths of Lituya Bay. Until then, we continue to study, learn, and prepare, taking the lessons of the past to better understand the future. Imagine waking up one morning to an Earth completely transformed. The oceans, which span more than 70% of the planet's surface, have frozen solid overnight. This isn't just a simple wintertime freeze, it's an apocalyptic transformation with far-reaching consequences. To truly grasp how life on Earth would change under these circumstances, we need to start by understanding the vital role oceans play in maintaining our planet's delicate balance. The oceans are far more than vast bodies of water. They are the engine that keeps our planet alive. By absorbing and redistributing heat from the sun, oceans regulate global temperatures and drive weather patterns. Without them, the Earth's climate system would be thrown into chaos. Their currents act like conveyor belts, moving warm water from the equator to the poles and circulating colder water back. This continuous motion ensures relatively stable temperatures around the globe, allowing ecosystems to thrive. If all the oceans froze overnight, this heat distribution would stop immediately. The equator, no longer cooled by ocean currents, would become unbearably hot. Meanwhile, regions farther from the equator would experience extreme and relentless cold. Weather patterns that we've come to recognize, such as predictable rain seasons or coastal breezes, would vanish, replaced by erratic and destructive storms. The visual of frozen oceans alone is enough to inspire awe and dread. From horizon to horizon, sheets of ice would stretch endlessly, reflecting sunlight instead of absorbing it. This would accelerate global cooling, as ice is far more reflective than water. Known as the albedo effect, this feedback loop could quickly plunge the planet into a deep freeze, turning even the most temperate regions into icy wastelands. One of the first and most profound impacts of frozen oceans would be on marine life. Oceans are teeming with biodiversity, from microscopic plankton to massive whales. These organisms depend on liquid water for survival. Plankton, which form the base of the oceanic food chain, would vanish almost immediately, triggering a cascade of extinctions. Marine ecosystems, built over millions of years, would collapse in an instant. In addition to marine life, the freezing of the oceans would directly impact the air we breathe. Phytoplankton, tiny organisms that live near the ocean's surface, produce about half of the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere through photosynthesis. With the oceans frozen and these organisms wiped out, oxygen levels would begin to decline, making survival even more challenging for land-dwelling creatures, including humans. This chilling scenario of frozen oceans sets the stage for even greater challenges that humanity would face. In the next part, we'll explore the domino effect this event would have on human societies, economies, and the planet's ecosystems. From food supply chains to the collapse of global trade, the repercussions of this catastrophic event would redefine life as we know it. With the oceans frozen solid, the cascading effects on human society would be nothing short of catastrophic. Almost overnight, the systems and infrastructure we rely on daily would begin to unravel, leaving humanity in a state of unprecedented crisis. Let's delve deeper into how this frozen world would transform our lives in ways we've never imagined. One of the immediate consequences would be the collapse of the global food supply. Oceans are not only home to marine life, but also a cornerstone of human sustenance. Over 3 billion people worldwide depend on seafood as their primary source of protein. Entire fishing industries would be obliterated, leaving communities that rely on the ocean for food and livelihood in desperate circumstances. But the impact doesn't stop there. Ocean-based economies, which include industries like tourism, shipping, and aquaculture, contribute trillions of dollars annually to the global economy. With the oceans frozen, these industries would grind to a halt, leading to mass unemployment and economic collapse. Global trade, which relies heavily on ocean transportation, would face an unprecedented crisis. Over 90% of the world's goods are transported by sea, from essential food and medical supplies to raw materials used in manufacturing. Without navigable oceans, ships would remain immobilized in ports, causing supply chains to fracture. Nations that rely on imports to sustain their populations would face severe shortages of essential goods, plunging millions into poverty and hunger. As if these challenges weren't enough, the Earth's climate would spiral into further chaos. With the oceans frozen, the planet's ability to absorb and moderate carbon dioxide levels would cease entirely. The oceans currently act as one of the largest carbon sinks, absorbing nearly 1/3 of all human-produced carbon dioxide. Without this mechanism, greenhouse gases would remain trapped in the atmosphere, amplifying the effects of climate change. Paradoxically, while the surface would freeze, atmospheric conditions could become increasingly volatile, with extreme storms and weather anomalies wreaking havoc across the globe. This drastic change would also disrupt freshwater availability. Over 2/3 of the Earth's freshwater supply is tied to the hydrological cycle, which depends on the continuous evaporation and precipitation facilitated by oceans. A frozen ocean would halt this cycle, leading to severe droughts in some regions and devastating floods in others, as weather patterns shift unpredictably. Major rivers and lakes that rely on consistent precipitation would dry up, further threatening water supplies for drinking, agriculture, and industry. In this frozen reality, life for humans would become increasingly fragile. Crops would struggle to grow in the harsh new climate, and the soil, deprived of consistent moisture, would lose its fertility. Agricultural yields would plummet, and nations around the globe would face widespread food shortages. Social unrest would likely erupt as communities fought over dwindling resources, leading to instability and conflict on a global scale. The interconnectedness of our world means that a frozen ocean would ripple through every aspect of life, revealing just how much humanity depends on the stability of our planet's natural systems. As we've now explored the immediate societal impacts, the next part will delve into the long-term environmental changes. and the grim reality of adapting to a planet where the oceans remain frozen. The long-term environmental impacts of frozen oceans would reshape Earth into a world nearly unrecognizable from the one we know. Over time, the planet's ecosystems and climates would adapt, or collapse, under the weight of this unprecedented change, setting off a chain reaction of consequences that would ripple through every aspect of the natural world. Let's explore how life on Earth would attempt to survive and the new challenges that would arise. A critical issue would be the disruption of the ocean's role in regulating the planet's temperature. In our current world, ocean currents act like massive conveyor belts, moving warm water from the equator toward the poles and colder water back toward the equator. This system, called thermohaline circulation, helps stabilize global temperatures. Without liquid oceans, this essential process would stop entirely. Regions near the equator would become unbearably hot, while areas closer to the poles would sink into perpetual deep freeze. This stark temperature divide would make large parts of the planet uninhabitable for both humans and wildlife. The extinction crisis that began immediately after the oceans froze would intensify over the years. Entire marine ecosystems would have already been wiped out, but the absence of these ecosystems would start to affect terrestrial life as well. Coastal habitats, which support diverse wildlife and vegetation, would be obliterated as frozen oceans encroach on land. Species that depend on these habitats, from seabirds to coastal predators, would face extinction without access to food or viable nesting areas. The loss of biodiversity would create ripple effects throughout the food web, destabilizing ecosystems on a massive scale. On land, ecosystems would struggle to adapt to the new climate conditions. Forests, grasslands, and wetlands are all intricately linked to the water cycle, which would be profoundly altered by the absence of liquid oceans. Rainfall patterns would become erratic and extreme, creating vast deserts in some regions and excessive flooding in others. Vegetation that depends on consistent rainfall, like crops and forests, would begin to die off, leading to soil erosion and desertification. The loss of plant life would reduce the planet's ability to absorb carbon dioxide, further exacerbating atmospheric instability. The frozen oceans would also create physical challenges for the planet itself. Ice expands as it forms, so the vast expanses of frozen water would begin exerting immense pressure on the Earth's crust. This could lead to an increase in seismic and volcanic activity as the planet adjusts to the added stress. Earthquakes might become more frequent and more severe, while dormant volcanoes could erupt unexpectedly. These geological events would add yet another layer of destruction to an already struggling world. Human attempts to adapt would bring their own set of challenges. As the frozen oceans created a landmass of ice, nations might try to exploit this new terrain for resources. However, any attempts to drill or mine beneath the ice would be fraught with danger. The unstable environment, combined with the difficulty of operating in extreme cold, would make such endeavors costly and hazardous. Additionally, competition for resources could lead to conflict, as countries vied for control over whatever scarce materials were left. One of the more chilling possibilities is the feedback loop created by the frozen oceans. As the ice reflects sunlight back into space, the planet would continue to cool. This could plunge Earth into a snowball state, where even land masses would freeze over, leaving only a thin band near the equator habitable for life. In such a scenario, surviving species, if any, would be forced to adapt rapidly or face extinction. Humanity would need to retreat to this narrow strip of land, relying on technology and ingenuity to eke out a precarious existence. In this frozen world, the concept of seasons would largely vanish. With no ocean currents to drive the cycle of warm and cold, many regions would be locked in unchanging climates. This would have far-reaching effects on agriculture, migration patterns, and even human culture, which has been shaped for millennia by the changing of the seasons. As we look at these grim possibilities, it's clear that the frozen oceans would not only alter life as we know it, but also challenge the very essence of survival itself. In the final part, we'll examine the ultimate fate of this frozen Earth, the potential for recovery, and whether humanity and the planet could ever find a path back to stability. As centuries pass on this frozen Earth, the chances of recovery grow slimmer, and humanity's attempts to adapt become increasingly desperate. The frozen oceans, once vital to the planet's stability, have created an unrelenting and hostile environment. The very essence of Earth's ecosystems has been fundamentally altered, and the possibility of returning to the world as it once was seems more like a distant memory than an achievable reality. One of the most pressing challenges would be humanity's search for sustainable energy. With frozen oceans cutting off access to offshore oil and gas reserves, alternative energy sources would need to be developed and expanded rapidly. Solar power, while viable in equatorial regions, would struggle in areas locked in perpetual cold and cloud cover. Wind energy could offer some relief, but the extreme weather conditions would make maintaining turbines nearly impossible. Efforts to harness geothermal energy might increase, but such ventures would remain limited to specific regions, creating disparities between nations with access to resources and those without. Survival would also hinge on humanity's ability to engineer new agricultural systems. Traditional farming methods would be rendered obsolete as arable land continues to shrink under extreme conditions. Innovations like vertical farming, hydroponics, and lab-grown food would dominate. But these systems require immense energy and technological infrastructure. Many nations would lack the means to implement these solutions, creating a divide between technologically advanced societies and those left behind to fend for themselves. With the oceans now a vast frozen expanse, travel and communication would also evolve in unprecedented ways. Air travel would remain possible, but would require vast amounts of energy and resources. Overland routes across the ice might develop, but they would be fraught with dangers like crevasses and unpredictable ice shifts. In the harshest climates, humanity might retreat into enclosed cities or underground habitats, designed to protect inhabitants from the freezing temperatures and the instability of the surface. Meanwhile, the natural world would continue its slow, silent transformation. In some places, life might adapt to the cold in unexpected ways. Species capable of surviving in extreme conditions, such as microorganisms and cold-adapted insects, could thrive, gradually filling ecological niches left vacant by the disappearance of larger organisms. Over time, entirely new ecosystems could emerge, ones built around the unique challenges of a frozen planet. These new forms of life would bear little resemblance to what once existed, representing a stark reminder of how profoundly the planet has changed. The psychological toll on humanity would be immense. Generations born into this frozen world would know nothing of liquid oceans, green fields, or temperate climates. Cultural expressions would shift to reflect the new reality, with art, music, and literature depicting themes of survival and endurance rather than the natural beauty of a world that no longer exists. Over time, collective memory of Earth's former state might fade, leaving only fragmented stories of a time when the planet was warm and vibrant. Despite these challenges, humanity would likely continue to search for solutions. Scientific efforts might focus on reversing the freeze, using advanced technologies to melt the ice and restore the oceans. However, such attempts would face monumental obstacles, not least the sheer scale of the frozen expanse. Even if technology advanced enough to begin the process, the timeline for success would span centuries or even millennia, far beyond the lifespan of any single generation. The Earth itself, in its frozen state, might stabilize eventually, but at great cost. A frozen planet could sustain some form of life, but it would be a shadow of what once existed. In this stark new reality, humanity's ingenuity, resilience, and ability to adapt would be tested like never before. Whether we would rise to the challenge or succumb to the harshness of this frozen world remains an open question. And so the story of frozen oceans is not just a tale of environmental collapse, but also a testament to the fragile balance of life on Earth. It serves as a reminder of the interconnectedness of our planet's systems and the need to protect them for future generations. Did you know that the 2017 Greenland tsunami was triggered by a massive glacier collapse, sending waves over 90 feet high crashing into the coastline? This massive event, which happened on June 17th, 2017, is one of the rare occasions where such a destructive natural disaster was caught on camera. The footage is breathtaking and shows the immense power of nature, reminding us just how fragile our planet can be. The incident took place in the Karat Fjord, a remote part of western Greenland. Greenland is home to the world's second largest ice sheet, which is over 3 kilometers thick in some places. This massive ice sheet has been shrinking rapidly over the past century, mainly due to rising temperatures. The ice loss is accelerating, and the result is something we're only starting to understand. The loss of ice leads to the collapse of glaciers, creating a dangerous ripple effect that can cause catastrophic events. In the case of this tsunami, the glacier that collapsed had been rapidly melting and breaking off into the fjord, adding pressure to the ice and ultimately causing the dramatic collapse. The tsunami itself was not caused by an earthquake, as most tsunamis are. Instead, it was triggered by the sudden and violent collapse of a section of the glacier into the fjord. When a large section of ice breaks off from the glacier, it can displace a significant amount of water. This displacement generates a huge wave, which in this case surged over 90 feet high. The enormous wave quickly moved toward the shore, sending water crashing into the surrounding coastline. Although the event occurred in a relatively remote area, the power of the tsunami was still strong enough to be recorded and studied by researchers who happened to be in the area at the time. This moment captured on film serves as a reminder of the terrifying power that nature can unleash. It also highlights just how vulnerable areas like Greenland are to the effects of climate change. Rising temperatures are melting the glaciers at an alarming rate, and these massive ice sheets are contributing to the rising sea levels we've been hearing about for years. When ice sheets melt and glaciers collapse, they don't just contribute to sea level rise, they can trigger other catastrophic events, like this one. The 2017 Greenland tsunami is just one example of how our changing climate is leading to increasingly extreme and dangerous natural disasters. The wave itself was incredibly dramatic. The scientists who filmed it were able to capture not just the size of the wave, but also the sense of how quickly it came crashing down. The image of that giant wall of water moving toward the shore, with plumes of water rising into the air, is unforgettable. It's a terrifying reminder that no matter how much we may think we control our environment, nature is still in charge, and sometimes it has the power to reshape everything in an instant. So, what exactly happened in Greenland that day, and what caused the glacier to collapse? The ice sheets in Greenland have been under stress for a long time. As the temperatures rise, the ice sheet begins to melt, weakening its structure. In the case of the Karat Fjord, a piece of the glacier became unstable, and it eventually cracked and fell into the fjord. This sudden release of ice caused the displacement of water, which created a wave so large that it crashed into the shoreline with unimaginable force. Though this was a relatively isolated area, the scale of the event makes it a warning sign of how climate change could affect coastal communities in the future. The fact that this event was caught on camera is one of the rare opportunities we have to witness nature's power in such a dramatic way. While this tsunami did not cause significant loss of life, it serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that climate change and glacial activity can bring. In the coming parts, we'll explore how the tsunami impacted the region, the aftermath, and the lasting effects of this event on our understanding of climate change's potential to create such sudden and severe natural disasters. The Karat Fjord tsunami on June 17, 2017 was a stark demonstration of the overwhelming force nature can unleash. What made this event even more remarkable was the rarity of such occurrences. While tsunamis are often associated with earthquakes, this one was triggered by the collapse of a massive glacier, which is an event that doesn't happen every day. The glacier's collapse created an enormous wave, sending it barreling toward the coast at a speed and size that was beyond comprehension. Scientists, researchers, and residents in the area witnessed something that few people ever experience firsthand: a natural disaster of this scale and power. The real story here isn't just the tsunami itself, but the warning signs that preceded it. For years before the collapse, the ice sheet in Greenland had been melting at an accelerated rate. This rapid melting isn't just a phenomenon we're seeing in Greenland, it's part of a much larger pattern of global warming and climate change. As the temperatures rise, glaciers, which were once stable, begin to break apart and release huge chunks of ice into the surrounding waters. This process, known as calving, is not unusual, but the scale at which it occurred in this instance was beyond what most experts anticipated. What set the 2017 Greenland tsunami apart from others was the sheer size of the glacier collapse. The Karat Fjord, where the glacier had been slowly eroding, became the site of one of the most dramatic natural events in recent history. The collapse of the glacier was so sudden and violent that it displaced a huge volume of water, which led to the creation of a giant wave. This tsunami was so powerful that it reached up to 90 feet in height. The size and speed at which it traveled is a reminder of just how quickly natural disasters can strike, especially when driven by larger environmental factors like the melting ice sheets. While the tsunami did not cause fatalities, it was a wake-up call. It's one thing to hear about the melting of the Greenland ice sheet or the rising sea levels, but it's another thing entirely to see the immediate effects of those changes in real time. This wasn't a slow-moving crisis, this was something sudden and uncontrollable. The collapse of the glacier, followed by the formation of a massive tsunami showed just how fragile our coastlines are. The event underscored the dangers coastal communities face due to the effects of climate change and how rapidly things can go from a minor event to something devastating. Scientists who were working in the area that day were fortunate to capture this extraordinary moment on film. The footage not only allowed us to witness the power of the wave, but also gave us a glimpse into the forces of nature that we often overlook. Seeing a glacier collapse in real time, followed by a tsunami crashing against the shore, provided an unparalleled perspective on the vulnerability of areas like Greenland to the changes caused by global warming. It's these types of events that serve as a visual reminder of the broader environmental challenges we face as a planet. Greenland's ice sheet has been shrinking for decades, but the events of June 17, 2017, made it painfully clear just how severe the consequences of this shrinking are. The aftermath of this tsunami was immediate and violent, but its long-term effects may be even more profound. As more glaciers continue to collapse and ice sheets melt, the world will be faced with a rising number of unpredictable and catastrophic events, from larger waves and stronger storms to increasingly devastating natural disasters that affect not just remote regions but coastal cities around the world. The Greenland tsunami stands as a symbol of the kind of dangers we will increasingly face in the years to come if we don't take action. But what can be done to stop the process? Scientists and experts are continually studying these changes, seeking ways to predict such events and protect vulnerable communities. The solutions aren't easy, and they require global cooperation. But understanding the causes, the impacts, and the magnitude of such events is the first step toward addressing the wider climate crisis, and ensuring that future generations don't have to live through the devastating consequences of a rapidly changing world. The immediate aftermath of the June 17, 2017 tsunami in Greenland was both breathtaking and terrifying. The wave, with its massive force, reshaped the landscape of the Carrot Fjord in ways that were hard to comprehend. While the event itself was over in a matter of minutes, the damage it caused would last for much longer. It wasn't just the destruction of the glacier itself. The real devastation came from the massive wave it created. As it crashed into the coastline, it left behind a scene of complete destruction. In the hours after the tsunami, the coastline was left in a state of disarray. Huge chunks of ice that had broken off from the glacier were scattered all along the shore. Rocks, trees, and debris were tossed around, some carried far from their original locations. The violent force of the wave had reshaped the coastline, washing away anything in its path. It wasn't just the physical destruction that was concerning. The event also revealed the delicate balance of the area's ecosystem. The fjord, which was home to a variety of wildlife, had been disturbed. The turbulent waters displaced marine life and caused irreversible damage to the natural environment. As the waves receded, it became clear that this was a dramatic reminder of how quickly nature can change, how fragile our ecosystems are, and how easily they can be disrupted by even a single catastrophic event. Though the immediate impact was catastrophic, the tsunami also served as an environmental warning. The glacier that collapsed, sending the huge wave crashing toward the shore, had been melting at an accelerating rate. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a small glimpse into the future of what could happen if global warming continues to progress at its current pace. If these glacial collapses become more common, the number of such tsunamis may rise, leading to even greater destruction in coastal areas. The loss of ice from the Greenland ice sheet has already contributed to rising sea levels, which in turn has made coastal communities more vulnerable to storms and flooding. This particular event was like a microcosm of the much larger challenges that lie ahead if nothing is done to slow the effects of climate change. The fact that the tsunami in Greenland occurred in a remote area where human life was not lost was in many ways a small blessing. However, the power of this natural disaster made it clear that it could happen anywhere. Coastal communities around the world, particularly those in low-lying areas, are at risk of similar events if the glaciers continue to melt at this alarming rate. It's a reminder that, although these events are still rare, their potential to cause widespread damage is significant. As we learn from these events, it's essential that we invest in understanding the science behind glacial activity and tsunamis, and how we can better predict and prepare for such disasters in the future. In the days and weeks following the tsunami, researchers from around the world flocked to the area to study the impact of the wave and the glacier collapse. The footage captured by scientists working in the region became a valuable resource, providing insights into the power of these kinds of natural events. but the true impact of the tsunami on Greenland's environment and the larger issue of climate change became a central focus for many experts. This one event acted as a stark reminder that the problems caused by global warming are not just about rising temperatures, they are about the complete disruption of ecosystems, the destruction of landscapes, and the unpredictable chain reactions that can follow. As experts began to analyze the data and the footage of the event, one thing became clear: we are entering a new era of climate risk. Events like the Greenland tsunami are not isolated occurrences, but part of a larger pattern of increasingly extreme weather events and natural disasters. The changing climate is already reshaping the world around us, and as we continue to see more and more of these kinds of events, the importance of taking action to address climate change becomes even more urgent. The impact of the Greenland tsunami serves as a cautionary tale, one that reminds us of the pressing need to tackle the environmental crisis before it's too late. The June 17, 2017 Greenland tsunami was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the growing dangers of climate change and the powerful forces of nature that we are only beginning to understand. While the destruction caused by the massive wave was extraordinary, the most alarming aspect of the event was the role that the melting glaciers and rising temperatures played in its creation. Greenland, with its vast ice sheet that has been slowly but surely shrinking over the past century, is at the forefront of this global crisis. The event wasn't just an isolated disaster, it was a clear sign of the devastating consequences of climate change. The Greenland tsunami serves as a powerful symbol of what can happen when nature's delicate balance is upset by human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels and the unchecked emission of greenhouse gases. Looking forward, it is clear that we need to pay more attention to the effects of glacial collapse and the associated risk of tsunami waves. Although the June 2017 disaster did not result in significant loss of life, the next event could easily take place in a more populated region with far-reaching consequences. The rapid rate at which Greenland's glaciers are melting suggests that tsunamis like the one we witnessed may become more frequent. As the glaciers continue to shed enormous amounts of ice into the sea, the risks of larger, more destructive tsunamis become more apparent. This is especially concerning for low-lying coastal areas around the world, where people are already facing the threat of rising sea levels and storm surges. Communities that live in these vulnerable regions must prepare for the worst and take measures to protect themselves. In addition to preparing for the immediate effects of such events, it is essential that we focus on long-term solutions to mitigate the causes of climate change. Reducing carbon emissions, transitioning to renewable energy sources, and implementing stronger environmental protection policies are all key steps that can help slow the melting of glaciers and the rise in sea levels. By addressing these root causes, we can not only reduce the risks of tsunamis, but also help stabilize the global climate for future generations. The event in Greenland should be seen not just as an isolated disaster, but as part of a larger trend of increasingly extreme weather events, driven by climate change. As we move forward, it's important to remember that the 2017 Greenland tsunami is not just a story of destruction, but also one of resilience and hope. The scientific community has responded to this event with a renewed commitment to studying and understanding the effects of climate change. Researchers are now more focused than ever on developing better tools and technologies to predict glacial calving, monitor sea levels, and warn communities about the potential for future tsunamis. The lessons learned from this event are helping us prepare for similar disasters in the future, but much more needs to be done. Increased funding for climate science, stronger international cooperation, and better disaster preparedness are crucial if we hope to protect vulnerable communities from the full impact of climate change. In conclusion, the 2017 Greenland tsunami is a powerful reminder that we cannot afford to ignore the impacts of climate change any longer. It is a call to action for all of us to do our part in slowing the destruction of our planet and protecting future generations from the devastating consequences of extreme weather events. While the wave that crashed into the Greenland coastline was a breathtaking display of nature's power, it also serves as a sobering warning of what lies ahead if we do not act swiftly and decisively. Let the tsunami be a symbol of change, a symbol that urges us to take responsibility for our environment before it's too late. The question is, will we heed the call? Did you know that more than 70% of Earth's surface is covered by the ocean? Now imagine waking up one morning and it's just gone. Not a drop left. No waves, no tides. Just empty, dry seabeds stretching for miles where water used to be. If every drop of ocean water disappeared overnight, it wouldn't just be shocking. It would be the beginning of the most dramatic transformation Earth has ever seen. Right away, the ocean floor would be exposed. Trillions of tons of mud, coral, trenches, and ancient volcanic ridges now sitting under direct sunlight. You'd see massive canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon, thousands of shipwrecks, forgotten underwater cables, and possibly things we've never even discovered. The deepest parts of the ocean, like the Mariana Trench, would now be visible to the human eye, but there would be no time to admire the view because things would fall apart fast. The sudden removal of that much water would create an enormous shift in pressure across the planet. Our crust would begin to creak and shift without the weight of the water pressing down. Coastal shelves that were used to holding that weight might rise, while land in other areas could collapse inward. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions would become more common, especially along the Ring of Fire in the Pacific. In places like Indonesia, Japan, and California, the risk of tectonic activity would skyrocket. Now let's talk about gravity for a second. The ocean isn't just big, it's heavy. All that water helps balance the planet. Without it, Earth's rotation might wobble slightly. It may not sound like a big deal, but over time, that small change could affect how long our days are and mess with seasonal patterns. It could even slightly shift the way Earth tilts on its axis, changing how sunlight hits different parts of the globe. Temperature is another huge issue. The ocean acts like a massive air conditioner for Earth. It absorbs heat from the sun during the day and slowly releases it at night, keeping temperatures stable. Without that, we'd start to see wild temperature swings. Daytime temperatures in many places could soar to record highs, while nights might become freezing. Think deserts, but everywhere. The areas that used to be near the coast would experience the most dramatic changes. Cities like San Francisco, Rio de Janeiro, and Cape Town could go from having mild weather to dealing with extreme heat during the day and bitter cold at night. And then there's the wind. Believe it or not, the ocean plays a big role in global wind patterns. It helps power massive systems like the jet stream and ocean currents like the Gulf Stream. Without those, weather patterns would change almost instantly. Storms would form in strange places, some areas would face non-stop drought, and others could get hit by powerful wind systems they've never dealt with before. Even the air would start to feel different. The ocean adds a ton of moisture to the atmosphere. Without it, the air in most places would become bone dry. Rainfall would stop in regions that rely on moisture from the ocean, and crops would start to fail. In some parts of the world, rivers would dry up because they depend on rainfall that comes from evaporated seawater. And one more strange thing, sea level would technically disappear, so our global reference for height and elevation would get reset. Everything from GPS systems to maps to construction planning would be thrown into chaos. Elevation signs on highways would no longer be accurate. Even airports and planes that use sea level as a base for flight data would have to completely update their systems. This is just the beginning. With no ocean left, we're looking at a chain reaction of problems that would touch every single part of life on Earth. And in the next part, we'll talk about what would happen to marine life and how entire ecosystems would collapse almost immediately. With the ocean gone, one of the first and most heartbreaking effects would be the complete loss of marine life. Everything from tiny plankton to massive whales would die out almost instantly. Without water, fish wouldn't survive for more than a few minutes. Coral reefs, which are already struggling today, would dry up and turn into chalky skeletons. Creatures that lived in the darkest parts of the deep sea would be exposed to sunlight for the first time, and their fragile bodies would not survive. This sudden extinction wouldn't just affect sea creatures. Entire food chains would fall apart. Seabirds that rely on fish would starve. Polar bears and seals, which depend on ice and ocean hunting grounds, would have nothing left, and it wouldn't stop with animals. The ocean also plays a massive role in feeding humans. Over 3 billion people today rely on seafood as their main source of protein. That food source would vanish overnight, causing global food shortages, especially in coastal countries and island nations. Then there's the fishing industry, which employs hundreds of millions of people around the world. In countries like Norway, Japan, Peru, and Indonesia, entire communities are built around the ocean. Without it, those jobs would disappear in a flash. The economic hit wouldn't be small. It would collapse entire industries. From seafood processing plants to boat-making companies and international shipping ports, The ripple effects would be massive. Tourism would also take a major hit. People love going to beaches, snorkeling in reefs, whale watching, and surfing. All of that would be gone. Beach towns that rely on tourism dollars, places like Bali, the Bahamas, and the coast of Spain, would become ghost towns. Hotels, restaurants, and tour companies would shut down, and the people who work in those industries would be left without jobs. The global economy would take a huge blow, especially in countries where ocean tourism is a major part of their income. But it's not just about jobs and food. The ocean is also one of the world's biggest pharmacies. Many medicines come from marine life, including treatments for cancer, infections, and pain. Some scientists believe we've only discovered a small percent of what the ocean can offer in terms of medical breakthroughs. Losing the ocean would mean losing all those possibilities, along with the chance to discover future cures hidden in the deep. On top of that, we'd lose one of our strongest defenses against disease. Coastal wetlands and mangroves, which grow near the ocean, act like natural filters. They trap harmful bacteria and prevent diseases from spreading inland. Without the ocean, these natural filters would die out, making it easier for illnesses to spread through dirty water and damage ecosystems. Even inland ecosystems would feel the impact. Rivers and lakes that connect to the ocean would see massive changes in water flow. Some could dry up, while others might flood. Plants and animals that depend on steady water levels would be thrown into chaos. Species would either migrate, adapt, or go extinct. And while the environment crashes, human society would begin to feel the pressure in every possible way. Food insecurity, job loss, and failing industries would all pile on fast. In many places, especially poorer countries, this could lead to protests, migration, and even conflicts over resources. With less food and fewer jobs, people would start moving inland, overwhelming cities that weren't built to handle huge population increases. This kind of crisis would not just affect one region, it would spread worldwide. In the next part, we'll dive into what happens to Earth's climate and weather when there's no ocean left to help balance it all out. Things would change fast, and not in a good way. Without the ocean, Earth's climate would start falling apart faster than most people could imagine. One of the biggest things the ocean does is move heat around the planet. It acts like a giant sponge, soaking up sunlight and helping to keep temperatures balanced between the equator and the poles. If all that water suddenly disappeared, there would be nothing left to absorb that heat. Places near the equator would become unbelievably hot, while colder areas might freeze even more than usual. Ocean currents, like the Gulf Stream, move warm water from the tropics up toward places like Europe and North America. These currents help regulate seasons, rain patterns, and even wind systems. Without them, entire continents would start to feel the change. Western Europe, which usually has mild winters because of the ocean's influence, would face brutal cold spells. Meanwhile, tropical areas would start to feel like ovens, and deserts could spread into places that used to be green and full of life. Rainfall patterns would also be thrown off completely. The ocean is a major source of the moisture that becomes rain. Without it, many parts of the world would dry out. Places like the Amazon rainforest, which depends on regular rainfall, could wither away. On the flip side, areas that already get too much rain could flood even worse. As strange weather patterns take over, it would become almost impossible to predict the weather anymore. Storms would act differently too. Right now, hurricanes form over warm ocean waters. Without the sea, those storms would no longer exist. That might sound like a good thing, but it's not that simple. Instead of hurricanes, we could start seeing new types of storms. With the atmosphere out of balance and no ocean to cool it down, powerful windstorms could rip through inland areas. Dust storms, heat waves, and sudden cold snaps could become the new normal. Some areas would become so dry they'd burn more easily, leading to more wildfires. Others would see thick fogs and strange shifts in pressure that damage buildings and roads over time. And then there's sea level. You'd think sea level wouldn't matter anymore if there's no ocean, but the sudden shift in pressure and gravity across the planet would cause the land itself to move in strange ways. Places that were once at sea level might sink or crack. Old coastlines would be full of shipwrecks, dried coral, and strange seabeds that used to be underwater for millions of years. Huge trenches and ridges would now be visible from space, creating a totally different map of the world. The air we breathe would also change. Right now, ocean plants like phytoplankton produce nearly half of the oxygen in the atmosphere. If they die, the amount of breathable oxygen could start to drop slowly. People with breathing problems would feel it first, but over time it would become an issue for everyone. Cities might need to install massive oxygen machines just to help people live normally. And without the ocean pulling carbon dioxide out of the air, that gas would build up fast, making the planet heat up even more. Even the seasons would start to feel strange. Winters might come later or earlier. Summers could be longer, drier, and more dangerous. Spring and fall might get shorter or disappear altogether. Animals that depend on regular seasons for migration or hibernation would be confused. They might start breeding at the wrong time or move to areas where they can't survive. Entire species could vanish just because the calendar no longer makes sense. As we continue, we'll explore what daily life might look like in this new version of Earth, how people might try to adapt, and what kind of world we'd be left with if the ocean stayed gone forever. In a world where the ocean no longer exists, daily life would become almost unrecognizable. The disappearance of such a massive body of water would completely change how people live, work, and survive. For starters, entire cities that once thrived along coastlines would be abandoned. With no ports, no beaches, and no water, there would be no reason for people to stay in places like San Francisco, Sydney, or Cape Town. These once busy coastal cities would turn into quiet ghost towns filled with empty buildings and cracked seabeds stretching for miles. Food would be one of the biggest concerns. With the ocean gone, seafood would vanish completely. Billions of people depend on fish and other marine animals for their protein. Losing that food source overnight would put enormous pressure on farms and livestock around the world. People would need to turn to alternative proteins like lab-grown meat or plant-based diets just to avoid widespread hunger. But even farming on land would be harder, since many farms near the coast rely on ocean moisture and stable weather. Without the ocean, crops could fail more often and prices would skyrocket. Transportation would also look completely different. Right now, cargo ships carry goods across oceans every day, connecting countries and driving global trade. Without the sea, international shipping would collapse. Everything from oil and gas to clothing and electronics would become harder to move. The cost of everyday items would rise and supply chains would fall apart. People would have to rely more on trains, planes, and land routes, but those methods are slower, more expensive, and not built to handle everything ships can carry. Tourism would take a massive hit too. Beaches, coral reefs, cruises, and seaside resorts would all be gone. Entire industries built around ocean tourism would disappear. Towns that used to welcome millions of visitors every year would lose their main source of income. Jobs in hospitality, water sports, and marine conservation would vanish, forcing people to move inland and search for new work in already crowded cities. The cultural impact would be just as huge. Think about how much of human history, art, and tradition is tied to the ocean. Stories of sea monsters, sailors, shipwrecks, and ocean gods would start to feel like distant fairy tales. Music, books, and movies about the sea would become a reflection of something lost. Even holidays and traditions based around the coast, like surfing festivals or seafood feasts, would disappear. People living far from the old ocean would grow up never hearing waves, smelling salt in the air, or seeing the sun rise over water. A major part of our connection to nature would be gone forever. The land left behind by the ocean would not be easy to live on. Much of it would be dry, salty, and full of strange, deep trenches and underwater mountains. It might take centuries before we could even build on it. Some explorers would probably try to cross the vast ocean floor, looking for secrets buried under the waves for millions of years, but without careful planning, these places would be dangerous and unstable, riddled with cracks, sinkholes, and sharp rock formations. In the long term, the human race would be forced to rethink how we live on this planet. Cities would need to be redesigned. Energy sources would need to be replaced since we'd lose ocean power. Like tides and waves, entire ecosystems would have to be rebuilt, if possible. People might even start building massive artificial lakes or try to pull water from underground just to balance things out a little. But even with all that effort, the world would never feel the same again. Losing the ocean would change the planet forever. Life would go on, but in a way that feels unfamiliar, harder, and more isolated. This kind of scenario reminds us how deeply connected we are to Earth's natural systems. The ocean's not just water, it's life, culture, history, and balance. Without it, we would not only lose a part of the planet, we would lose a part of ourselves. Thanks for sticking with this wild thought experiment. If this gave you something to think about, share it with someone else, and maybe go take a look at the ocean if you're lucky enough to live near it. Just knowing it's still out there doing its job is something we shouldn't take for granted. Imagine waking up to news that a storm with winds speeds over 400 miles per hour is forming in the Atlantic Ocean. Not a regular hurricane, but something much worse: a hypercane. This is a theoretical superstorm that scientists believe could form under very rare and extreme conditions. It would be like a hurricane, but way stronger, larger, and much more dangerous. And in this hypothetical, one is now brewing just off the coast. For a hypercane to form, ocean temperatures would have to rise to around 113 degrees Fahrenheit, which is way hotter than anything we've seen in the Atlantic. To compare, most hurricanes begin when ocean water is around 80 degrees. That means something drastic would have to happen, like an underwater volcanic eruption or some kind of massive heat spike in the ocean. Once water reaches that level of heat, the atmosphere above it would become super unstable. The result could be a vertical column of rising air so powerful that it breaks into the upper layers of the atmosphere. This new storm would grow fast, much faster than any hurricane we've seen before. It could stretch for hundreds of miles and keep pulling in energy from the hot ocean below. Regular hurricanes lose power when they hit land, but a hypercane could stay strong much longer and cover more ground. It wouldn't just be a huge storm, it would be a machine feeding itself and growing stronger by the hour. Now imagine this hypercane spinning over the Atlantic. The pressure in its center would be so low that the winds around it would be pulled in at over 400 miles per hour, faster than the strongest tornadoes. These kinds of winds could rip roofs off buildings, snap steel towers, and turn debris into deadly projectiles. And this isn't just limited to coastal areas. A storm this powerful could keep pushing inland for hundreds of miles, flattening cities, towns, and infrastructure in its path. What makes this scarier is the storm surge. A hypercane could push walls of water inland, possibly reaching over 100 feet high. That's more than a 10-story building. Entire coastal cities could be underwater in hours. It wouldn't just be about evacuating. It would be about escaping before roads, bridges, and airports are swallowed up. The rainfall could also be record-breaking. Some scientists believe a hypercane could dump more rain in a single day than most hurricanes release in a week. This kind of storm would not just damage homes and roads, it would completely overwhelm emergency response systems. Power grids would fail, cell towers would collapse, and with so much flooding and wind damage, it might be weeks before help could reach some areas. And all of this is just what could happen in the first few days of a hypercane forming and making landfall along the Atlantic coast. Once the hypercane makes landfall and starts tearing through the east coast, the aftermath would look like something out of a science fiction movie. Cities near the coast would be hit first, and most of them wouldn't stand a chance against winds that strong. Skyscrapers could bend or break, glass would be flying everywhere, and even reinforced concrete structures might not hold up. But what makes this situation even more dangerous is what happens next. After the wind and storm surge, it's the total shutdown of daily life. Millions of people could be without power almost instantly. Power plants near the coastline would flood or shut down as a precaution, but even backup generators might fail. With no electricity, communication breaks down. Cell phones stop working. Internet service disappears, and even emergency radio systems could be knocked offline. It would be very hard to get information out, or in. Gas stations would be closed, grocery stores would be empty, and clean drinking water could be nearly impossible to find. A storm this powerful would rip apart water treatment plants, flood sewage systems, and contaminate freshwater supplies across entire regions. Hospitals would be pushed beyond their limits, especially in smaller towns. With roads blocked by fallen trees, crushed vehicles, and flooding, rescue teams might take days just to reach the worst-hit areas. But the damage wouldn't stop at buildings and roads. Farmland across the eastern United States could be destroyed. Crops would be flattened, soil washed away, and livestock killed or scattered. This would throw off the food supply chain in a huge way. Everything from corn and wheat to vegetables and fruit could see shortages within days. Grocery stores that still had power would be picked clean fast. The effects wouldn't just be felt locally. The ripple effect would travel across the country. Airports would shut down, both because of flooding and because there wouldn't be working radar or functioning control towers. Transportation of goods would grind to a halt. Ports along the East Coast, which handle millions of tons of cargo every year, would be wiped out or underwater. That means delays in everything from food and medicine to electronics and basic supplies. At the same time, the hypercane wouldn't just vanish once it moves inland. It would slowly weaken over time, but because it started off with so much energy, it could still bring major destruction as it moves. Cities hundreds of miles from the coast, places like Atlanta, Pittsburgh, even parts of the Midwest, could see extreme rain, heavy winds, and dangerous base flooding. Rivers would overflow, dams could fail, and small towns far from the ocean would suddenly be in crisis. On top of all this, toxic spills and chemical leaks would become a real threat. Refineries and factories near the water could leak oil, gas, or industrial waste into floodwaters. These contaminants would spread fast, affecting not only marine life, but also human health. Cleanup would be massive, expensive, and take years to fully complete. And while all of this chaos is unfolding on the ground, scientists and emergency officials would be racing to understand whether another Hypercane could be forming behind the first one, especially if the ocean waters stayed hot. In the days and weeks after the Hypercane moved inland and lost strength, the real long-term consequences would start to reveal themselves. One of the biggest issues would be displacement. Millions of people from coastal cities like Miami, Charleston, New York City, and Boston could be forced to evacuate with no clear timeline for when or if they could return. Entire neighborhoods might be gone, not just damaged, but wiped completely off the map. Emergency shelters in nearby states would be overwhelmed. Schools, sports arenas, and community centers would be turned into makeshift homes for families that had lost everything. Sanitation would become a growing concern. Without proper plumbing or waste management, even shelters could become health risks. Disease outbreaks could begin to spread, especially in crowded and humid conditions. Insurance companies would be flooded with claims, not just for home damage, but for destroyed cars, lost businesses, and agricultural losses. But with so many claims coming in at once, the entire system could start to buckle. People might wait weeks or even months for the financial support they need just to rebuild. Many small businesses would shut down permanently. The local economy in the hardest hit regions could collapse entirely, leaving people jobless and unsure of what to do next. Meanwhile, the environmental damage wouldn't be limited to oil spills and broken infrastructure. The coastline itself would be reshaped. Barrier islands could be washed away. Wetlands and marshes, which serve as natural storm buffers, would be torn up or permanently eroded. Wildlife that depends on these habitats, aquatic birds, fish, amphibians, would either die off or flee the area entirely. Some ecosystems might never fully recover. Fisheries along the east coast would be devastated. Boats would be destroyed, docks ripped apart, and processing plants flooded. Saltwater intrusion from the storm surge would poison freshwater systems, ruining habitats and killing off fish populations. The fishing industry in places like Maine and the Carolinas could be crippled for years, leading to job losses and food shortages in surrounding areas. Then there's the mental impact. People who survive events like this often suffer from long-term trauma. Anxiety, depression, and PTSD are all common. Kids who live through these kinds of disasters might have trouble focusing in school, and adults might struggle to go back to their normal routines. Recovery is not just about rebuilding buildings, it's also about healing minds, and that takes much longer. International aid might be needed, especially if the federal government struggled to keep up with the demand for support. Countries around the world could step in with supplies, financial aid, and rescue teams. Global media would follow the story closely, and the world would be watching to see how the United States handled one of the most powerful storms in history. But beyond the headlines, experts would begin to ask tough questions. Could this happen again? Were early warning systems fast enough? Did climate change play a role in making the storm more intense? Researchers would dig into ocean temperature records, wind patterns, and pressure systems to try to understand exactly how the Hypercane had formed and whether more might be on the way. After the damage, the flooding, and the humanitarian crisis, attention would slowly shift toward the future. Scientists, engineers, and world leaders would gather to figure out what this Hypercane really meant. One of the biggest takeaways would be the need to seriously rethink coastal development. Cities that were once seen as booming coastal hubs might suddenly be considered too risky to rebuild. Discussions would begin about turning certain zones into permanent evacuation areas, or rebuilding them as green buffer zones instead of residential neighborhoods. Governments might start enforcing stricter building codes, requiring structures in storm-prone areas to withstand stronger winds and higher floods. Infrastructure planning would change too. Power lines could be moved underground. Seawalls might be built taller and wider, and emergency communication networks would be upgraded. More advanced radar and satellite technology would be funded to help detect changes in the atmosphere that might point to another Hypercane forming in the future. At the same time, global conversations around climate change would become much more urgent. A storm like this wouldn't just be seen as a one-time disaster, it would be viewed as a possible preview of what could come next if ocean temperatures continue to rise. World leaders would face pressure to take stronger action, not just in reducing carbon emissions, but in preparing for even more extreme weather events. The storm would also reshape how people think about weather in general. For most of history, hurricanes have been categorized using the Saffir-Simpson scale, which goes from Category 1 to Category 5. But a hypercane would go far beyond that. Meteorologists might consider creating a new classification system, something that acknowledges how this kind of storm breaks all the usual rules. In schools, kids would learn about the hypercane the way past generations learned about major earthquakes or world wars as a moment in history that changed everything. Documentaries would be made, books would be written, and survivors would tell their stories for years to come. In some cities, memorials might be built to honor the lives lost and the communities forever changed. Economically, recovery would take years. Insurance rates for coastal areas would skyrocket, and some companies might refuse to cover those regions at all. Tourism in coastal cities would slow down, especially in places where popular beaches or boardwalks were damaged beyond recognition. Farming regions, affected by saltwater contamination or flood damage, would struggle to grow crops, adding pressure to food supply chains already stretched thin. But as hard as it would be, the world would also adapt. New technologies might emerge to help manage storms, things like artificial cloud seeding, sea surface cooling, or better global weather control models. Scientists would likely work together across borders, combining research to better understand what triggered the hypercane and how to prevent another. Most importantly, people would not forget. A hypercane hitting the Atlantic Ocean wouldn't just be a disaster, it would be a warning, a reminder of how powerful nature can be and how closely human life is tied to the balance of our environment. The damage would be real. The loss would be massive, but the lessons learned might just help protect future generations from facing something even worse. Yeah. Thanks for sticking with me through this intense hypothetical. Let me know what you think would happen if a hypercane ever formed in real life. And don't forget to check out our other video on rare weather events that science says could still happen. Tsunamis are some of the most powerful and destructive forces of nature, capable of reshaping coastlines and causing widespread devastation. But how do they form? What causes these massive waves to suddenly appear? Understanding the science behind tsunamis is key to not only grasping their power, but also to being able to prepare for and minimize their impact. Tsunamis aren't like the regular waves you might see at the beach. These waves are much larger and far more dangerous, and their formation starts deep beneath the ocean's surface. Unlike normal waves, which are driven by wind, tsunamis are usually caused by sudden, massive changes in the ocean floor. This can happen for a variety of reasons, but the most common cause is underwater earthquakes. When an earthquake occurs beneath the ocean, the Earth's crust shifts dramatically. This shift can displace an enormous amount of water, creating a series of waves that spread out from the point of the earthquake. These waves can travel at speeds of up to 500 miles per hour across the open ocean, making them extremely fast and difficult to detect. In fact, even though a tsunami can be triggered miles from shore, it often goes unnoticed until the waves start to approach land. What's unique about these waves is that even though they travel incredibly fast, their height is relatively small in deep water, often only a few feet tall. This is why in the open ocean, ships and boats won't notice a tsunami, as the waves pass beneath them without causing much disruption. But as the waves get closer to shore, the water begins to slow down and the waves begin to grow in height. This is where the real danger lies. When the tsunami reaches the coastline, the water can surge hundreds of feet into the air, creating massive walls of water that crash onto the land. The biggest challenge with tsunamis is their unpredictability. While we have some understanding of the factors that cause them, we still don't know exactly when or where they will occur. And even though we know what triggers tsunamis, there's no real way to predict exactly how big they will be or how far they will travel. This makes it extremely difficult to prepare for their impact, as there's often little to no warning before they strike. The effects of a tsunami can be catastrophic. When a tsunami hits land, it doesn't just cause damage from the waves themselves, but it can also trigger flooding, erosion, and destruction of infrastructure. Coastal communities are particularly vulnerable as the waves can travel miles inland, sweeping away homes, buildings, and anything else in their path. Even more concerning is the potential for massive loss of life especially in densely populated areas, and one of the most devastating examples of a tsunami occurred in December of 2004 when a powerful earthquake off the coast of Indonesia triggered a massive tsunami. This tsunami affected countries across the Indian Ocean, including Thailand, Sri Lanka, and India. The waves reached as far as Africa, and more than 200,000 people lost their lives as a result. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami serves as a tragic reminder of just how dangerous and unpredictable these natural disasters can be. The impact of tsunamis can extend far beyond the immediate coastline, affecting global trade, tourism, and commerce. In the wake of a tsunami, it can take months or even years for affected areas to recover. So understanding how tsunamis form and recognizing the warning signs is crucial for minimizing their impact and saving lives. Now that we've covered the basics of tsunami formation, we'll dive deeper into the factors that contribute to these massive waves, including underwater earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and landslides. In the previous part, we explored the basics of tsunamis, but now let's dive deeper into one of the main causes of these devastating waves, underwater earthquakes. These natural events play a major role in generating tsunamis, and understanding how they work can shed light on the formation of these powerful waves. Underwater earthquakes occur when the Earth's tectonic plates shift, usually along fault lines beneath the ocean. The Earth's crust is made up of large, rigid plates that float on the semi-fluid mantle underneath. These plates are constantly moving, and when they collide, slide past one another, or separate, it causes stress to build up along fault lines. Eventually, the pressure becomes too great and the plates suddenly shift, releasing massive amounts of energy in the form of an earthquake. When an earthquake occurs beneath the ocean, the ground can move up or down, displacing the water above it. This sudden displacement is what generates the waves that we know as tsunamis. The size of the tsunami depends on several factors, including the magnitude of the earthquake, the depth of the earthquake's epicenter, and the type of fault movement. For example, a vertical shift in the ocean floor is more likely to displace large amounts of water, creating a higher tsunami wave compared to horizontal movements. The bigger the shift, the more water gets displaced, and the larger the tsunami can become. This is why more powerful earthquakes, such as those with a magnitude of 7 or higher, are more likely to trigger large tsunamis. One important thing to understand is that while the earthquake itself may only last for a few seconds or minutes, the resulting tsunami waves can continue to travel for hours. These waves can affect vast areas, crossing entire oceans and hitting multiple coastlines before they dissipate. The energy from the earthquake spreads across the ocean, causing a chain reaction of waves that grow in height as they approach the shore. Another critical factor in tsunami formation is the location of the earthquake. Tsunamis are most commonly triggered by earthquakes that occur along subduction zones, where one tectonic plate is forced beneath another. These areas are often located along the Pacific Ring of Fire, a region known for frequent earthquakes and volcanic activity. Countries like Japan, Chile, and Indonesia are especially vulnerable to tsunamis due to their proximity to these subduction zones. A classic example of a tsunami triggered by an underwater earthquake is the devastating event that occurred on December 26, 2004. A massive earthquake with a magnitude of 9.1 struck off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, causing the ocean floor to shift dramatically. This earthquake generated a tsunami that affected countries across the Indian Ocean, including Thailand, Sri Lanka, and even parts of Africa. The waves reached heights of over 30 meters in some areas, causing widespread devastation and loss of life. While underwater earthquakes are a significant cause of tsunamis, they are not the only factor at play. Other events, like volcanic eruptions and underwater landslides, can also trigger tsunami waves. In the next part, we will explore how these factors contribute to tsunami formation and the effects they can have on coastal areas. Stay tuned. In the previous part, we looked at how underwater earthquakes trigger tsunamis, but now let's explore two other powerful forces that can cause tsunamis: volcanic eruptions and underwater landslides. Both of these events can displace massive amounts of water, leading to waves that can travel across the ocean and cause significant damage to coastal areas. Volcanic eruptions can be another key trigger of tsunamis, especially when they occur beneath the ocean. While we usually associate volcanic eruptions with lava flows and explosive ash clouds, when they happen underwater, they can create massive disturbances in the water above. One way that volcanic eruptions trigger tsunamis is through the collapse of a volcanic island or underwater caldera. A caldera is a large bowl-shaped crater that forms when a volcano collapses after an eruption. When the volcano's magma chamber empties, the pressure from the underlying layers of Earth can cause the seafloor to drop rapidly, displacing huge amounts of water. This sudden drop in the seafloor can send waves racing across the ocean, much like the waves created by an earthquake. Another way that volcanic eruptions can cause tsunamis is through pyroclastic flows. These fast-moving, hot mixtures of ash, gas, and volcanic debris can travel at high speeds across the ocean surface. When they enter the water, they displace large amounts of water, generating waves. These waves may not be as large as those created by an earthquake or a caldera collapse, but they can still cause significant damage along coastlines. A notable example of a volcanic eruption triggering a tsunami occurred in August of 1923 in Japan. A violent eruption of the Sakurajima volcano created pyroclastic flows that traveled into the sea, displacing enough water to create tsunami waves that caused significant damage to nearby coastal communities. Underwater landslides, also known as submarine landslides, can also be responsible for generating tsunamis. These landslides happen when large amounts of sediment, rocks, or debris move suddenly down the continental slope or underwater slopes. The displaced material causes the water above it to move rapidly, creating waves that can travel across the ocean. Submarine landslides can occur for several reasons, including earthquakes, volcanic activity, or even the buildup of excess water in an area. These landslides are often triggered by the destabilization of the seafloor, which can occur when an underwater earthquake shakes loose sediment and rock. In other cases, volcanic eruptions or underwater mining operations can also displace material, triggering landslides. One infamous case of a tsunami, caused by an underwater landslide, took place in 1998 off the coast of Papua New Guinea. A massive landslide, triggered by an undersea earthquake, sent waves of up to 10 meters high crashing into the nearby coastline, resulting in over 2,000 deaths and widespread damage. Submarine landslides are often harder to predict than earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, making them a significant threat in areas where underwater slopes are unstable. They can occur suddenly and without warning, adding to the complexity of tsunami forecasting and preparation. In the next part, we will explore the effects of tsunamis and how they impact coastal communities, from the first signs of a tsunami to the aftermath of a devastating wave. Stay tuned for more on this powerful natural phenomenon. Now that we've explored the science behind how tsunamis form, it's time to take a closer look at their impact and the importance of preparation. Tsunamis can be one of the most devastating natural disasters, capable of causing massive destruction in a very short amount of time. While the waves themselves can arrive quickly, the damage they leave behind can last for years, affecting entire communities and economies. When a tsunami hits, the first wave is often not the largest, and multiple waves can follow. These waves can travel across vast distances, and the time between waves can range from minutes to hours. The waves can be extremely powerful, reaching heights of up to 100 feet or more, depending on the size of the event. The force of the water can cause buildings to collapse, sweep away vehicles, and flood entire cities. Coastal areas are especially vulnerable, as they are directly in the path of the waves. The damage caused by a tsunami isn't just physical. The waves can also severely impact the environment, destroying marine ecosystems, beaches, and vital coastal habitats. The displacement of water can lead to changes in local water quality, and the debris carried by the waves can spread pollutants. In the aftermath of a tsunami, the economic costs can be enormous, especially for communities that rely on tourism, fishing, or trade for their livelihood. In addition to the immediate destruction, tsunamis can leave long-term effects that persist for years. Communities often face rebuilding efforts that can take decades, and many people are displaced from their homes either temporarily or permanently. It can take a long time for people to return to their normal lives, and recovery efforts can be hindered by damaged infrastructure, lack of resources, and challenges in coordinating aid. Despite the devastation caused by tsunamis, there are ways to mitigate their impact. One of the most important factors in minimizing the destruction of a tsunami is early warning systems. Tsunami warning systems rely on networks of sensors placed on the ocean floor to detect changes in water pressure caused by earthquakes or underwater landslides. When a potential tsunami is detected, warnings are issued to coastal communities, giving them time to evacuate to higher ground. Tsunami evacuation plans and drills are essential for preparing people for these events. Communities in high-risk areas must have clear evacuation routes and safe zones, and local authorities must ensure that residents are educated on what to do if a tsunami occurs. The quicker people can evacuate, the more lives can be saved. Another important factor in minimizing the impact of tsunamis is effective building codes and infrastructure design. In areas where tsunamis are a known risk, buildings should be constructed with materials and designs that can withstand the force of the waves. Coastal barriers, like seawalls or floodgates, can also help protect vulnerable areas from flooding. Tsunamis are unpredictable and can strike at any time, but through increased awareness, preparation, and the use of technology, we can reduce their devastating effects. By studying past events and improving our understanding of tsunami formation, we can develop better strategies for both prevention and recovery. Understanding how tsunamis form and their potential impact is essential for preparing communities and saving lives. If you're interested in learning more about natural disasters and how they shape our world, be sure to check out my next video. Stay safe, and remember that preparedness is key when it comes to surviving a tsunami.